Good evening, and thank you so much for the opportunity to speak this evening. The title of my presentation is the World Report on Visions 2019 Focus on the Impending Myopic or the Myopia Epidemic. I want to first say I have nothing to disclose, and I'll move right into the presentation. I used the World Report on Vision as the beginning point. In 2019, it was released by the World Health Organization, and it highlighted the importance of vision and eye health. It focused on the causes of visual impairment and blindness, and more importantly, it focused on those that were preventable, including the uncorrected near vision that we often refer to as presbyopia. The fact is, vision issues are important because if everyone lives long enough, they will experience at least one condition that will be affecting them in their lifetime. Today, I'm focusing on myopia. While the World Report is much more diverse than just myopia, it highlighted the fact that more than 2 billion people in the world have myopia, and over 300 million of them are under 19 years of age. Those are our children. The concern always is that people in low and middle income countries are at a much higher risk, 4 times that of people in high income countries, for having unaddressed, uncorrected myopia or poor distance vision. We also know by the research by Brian Holden et al. That the number of people with myopia is increasing drastically. Looking at the data from the year 2000 to 2030, we know that just the myopia is increasing by 2.5 times, and the amount of high myopia, which we'll go into in a little more detail, is increasing by 3 times almost. So those are certainly data pieces that concern us as we move forward. There is a significant impact of uncorrected myopia on the population. It is truly the leading cause that is preventable in both children and adults. We do know that uncorrected myopia leads to a poor quality of life and impacts academic performance negatively, as well as it impacts the ability to do a job and to stay independent as an adult. There are also things that we've highlighted more recently that are related to the fact of high myopia. Those with high myopia are showing to be associated with a number of causes that lead to permanent blindness. Here is an example of the diversity of the prevalence of myopia around the world. If you look at East Asia, 57% of the population is myopic, while places like Oceania and the Middle East and North Africa are much lower. So there's a diversity as to who is affected and how much they're affected. One of the other things that's really very important is the fact that as you have a higher magnitude of myopia, you are at much higher risk for some of the associated eye health problems. For example, let's look at myopic maculopathy. The odds ratio, if you are a 2-diopter myope, is only 2.2. But when you're an 8-diopter myope, which isn't that unheard of nowadays, your odds ratios are 126.8, showing a significant increase in the chances of having a devastating eye disease. So there are, as I said, there are multiple things that lead to eye health issues within myopia. We call high myopia refractive errors found of at least -6 or larger amounts, or an axial length of 26.5 millimeters or more. And we know that there's at least 3% of the world population that has a pathologic myopic problem. That means they are demonstrating one associated eye health problem that is progressive, irreversible, and it usually affects them during their productive years. The things that we see most often are posterior staphylomas, black or cracks, chorioretinal atrophy, macular retinoschisis, glaucoma, and myopic choroid neovascularization. The fact of the issue being a significant problem and one that is just getting worse as we go on, plus a significant amount of research that's been done in the area of myopia, caused the World Council of Optometry to think about creating this resolution. Cooper Vision came to us and said they would be excited to help us write this and cultivate it in such a way that we look at myopia no longer as simply a refractive error, but now as a disease entity. And we focused on it as the opportunity to look at mitigation, measurement, and management. So not only we tell people that we need to rethink of what we believe myopia is, but we need to know how best to treat it based on good, solid science and evidence. We know that through the research that's been done over the past decade, is that myopia is highly heritable. There are hundreds of potential genes that seem to influence the development of myopia. But we've also learned from the research that there are certain environmental factors that play into the potential of us either getting myopia, the myopia progressing, or slowing the progression. We've seen that near work, based on the amount of time on devices or other close work and the intensity of it, may harm or hinder the development of myopia, causing a higher amount earlier on. Whereas light exposure, and we don't have a sufficient amount of light exposure, there seems to be also an indication of more risk for myopia development. So how are children with myopia identified? There's certainly a multitude of processes that go along with it. In places where people are well aware of myopia, you don't think so much about it. You automatically know what the risk factors are. If a parent has myopia, they know that decreased distance acuities will affect it. But the fact is, most children will be picked up in pediatric primary eye care, primary healthcare settings, or in community vision screenings. And they're then referred through a multitude of ways, whether it's a piece of paper saying you failed the screening or you're being referred, whether it's a verbal explanation that a child needs to go see an eye doctor because their distance acuities are poor, they're having trouble seeing the board, they're having difficulties driving, or an electronic method. And they're referred to places where good comprehensive eye care is provided, whether it's in a clinic that's a multidisciplinary clinic, a vision center that focuses solely on vision problems, or mobile vans that go out to various remote areas. And then the decision is, after the exam is done and they identify whether myopia actually exists, they need to decide on what are the next steps. So oftentimes it is dependent on what's available and what the knowledge level is with respect to myopia control. Typically, it was always a single vision lens that was considered, but we no longer look at that as the most appropriate first line of treatment. We now look at a multitude of different things because more tools have come out that can slow the progression down. And then once that's done, you monitor that patient over time to make sure that we identify if an eye health issue does take place. So that patient is then followed through within the eye care system from a primary level, if they're just addressing myopia control, to a secondary or tertiary level where the myopia eye health issues are now starting to show up and a more aggressive intervention is required. But we also need to think about the research that we have is wonderful and has really guided us, but it hasn't shown us all the answers and it needs to be continued. The World Council of Optometry has really focused on myopia, and I'd like to direct you to our website where you will find a number of tools available for you. You will find information with our standard of care in multiple languages. You will find information about webinars there that you can look at and at your own time, and many things that will guide you within our myopia moments. And I'll talk about those a little more in a minute. When you make the decision of, now I have a patient with myopia, where do I go from here? You need to understand that there's no single method of treatment that shows clear superiority with all the options we have available. Orthokeratology, soft contact lenses that are specifically designed for myopia control, spectacles designed for myopia control, or atropine with multiple different percentages. But you have to think about, what is best for the patient sitting in my chair? That means it's based on what you're comfortable with doing, what the preferences of the family are, and what the child's capabilities are as far as adapting to whatever recommendations you make. And certainly we always look at the availability of products and regulatory considerations. So this slide is just giving you a sense that there are many choices. There are different types of spectacle lenses and contact lenses, or different types of percentages of atropine that are typically being used. There are optical lenses that come in glasses form or contact lens form, and then orthokeratology. But you need to remember, we know for a fact that single vision regular lenses are not always the best way to go, but one of the lenses designed to slow the progression. But it has to suit the child, it has to fit your scope of practice, and we typically start with an optical basis. So what's best for the child? How do you decide? Well, does the patient and the parent have access to the resources that are needed, whether it's financial resources, the time for multiple follow-ups, the distance for them to reach the follow-up, because most of these things can't be done by telemedicine, and is the child ready for whatever treatment you're going to do? And then what are their lifestyles? Do they play sports? You can't put a child in a pair of spectacles that's out on a soccer field or a basketball court. And do they like to wear their glasses? If they don't, is glasses a good consideration? And then you need to think, if you as a clinician, what do you have available at your fingertips within your practice? What best fits the child's refractive error? And do they have any other eye health issues that are related? And what fits the family skill set? A family that is comfortable putting contact lenses in themselves may be a good choice for that. And then you need to decide, where do I want to start? Do I want to start in an optical side, or do I want to start in a pharmacological side? But whatever it is, it has to fit with what the child says. If you say yes to glasses, you have contact lenses or spectacles to choose from. If you say no to glasses, you have multiple types of percentages. And I have to say, at this point, there are multiple percentages that are being used in different studies, and you have to follow the science. If one or the other is not working, the next question is, should you consider a combination treatment? And then it would be a combination of an optical and pharmacological. And you need to follow that child pretty closely. How do you decide? The best thoughts in knowing whether this child will progress when you're first finding a child? Well, family history does play very heavily into this. If one parent is myopic, the child has 6 times more higher risk to becoming myopic by the time they're 16. When do you decide to give them their first spectacle correction? Well, people start to look at someone who is plus 75 or less by cycloplegic refraction as early as 6 years of age. But the prediction of myopia onset by 9 to 10 has a sensitivity of 91% and specificity of 77% at that point. So that tells me this is a child very likely to develop myopia. Should I intervene? And the other piece that we hear so much about, and really is showing a significant influence in our decisions, is measuring axial length. If it is 23.19 millimeters by the age of 6 or 7, that is predictive of someone who is going to develop myopia within the next few years. Every additional millimeter in axial length at that stage increases the risk of development by 2.5 times. So all those things are important. We do have axial length growth charts that will give you more information. There's one for the younger cohort, which is less than 15 and 16 years of age, or the older cohort, which are young adults that you could use. One other tool I did want to share is the Primo program that came out of the NICER site. This is an evidence-based tool to indicate whether myopia will develop. It is based on whether the parent is myopic, whether the child's cycloplegic refraction has hyperopia or not, and what the axial length myopia is. You are looking for a risk score that will help you decide what the next step is. So if you had one parent myopic, the refractive error at 6 to 7 of plus 75 and axial length about 23 millimeters, you know that that patient will have a moderate risk of being myopic by the time they're 13 years of age. There are other tables that they have created out of this study, because not everybody cycloplegics or has access to cycloplegics, and not everybody has a tool to assess axial length. So what they do is they create alternative programs that will fit into the data that they've collected over the year. And then they have a mechanism where they can identify whether there is little or no risk for the child to develop myopia, moderate risk, and high risk. And that will tell you how often you need to see the child after you've seen them at 6 years and when to see them again, so that you catch the myopia when it begins to develop. There are also tools that we created to follow the mitigation, measurement, and management of myopia on the World Council of Optometry website. It focuses on each of these and talks about different pieces, like the consequences of myopia. We talk about the severity and the eye health risk, and we show different ways of deciding how to make the decision. You can also see our myopia moments, which are a summary of the research that's out there. They're about 1.5 years old right now, and we're in the process of redoing them. So keep going back to the website. You will find new and updated myopia moments that will reflect the current research that's being published on a regular basis. And the last piece I wanted to talk about is there are ethical considerations. We know when we decide to treat myopia through myopia control, there are many ways to do it. We prefer on-label, meaning things that have been approved by regulatory bodies. But you need to decide if you have access to it and what is the research showing us. If you are going to choose whether it is an on-label or an off-label mechanism, you want to make sure that it is safe and it is effective. You need to know that the patient knows when to do what, and making that decision. If you feel comfortable that they will follow the recommendations, then you can go ahead with it. And you also need to be able to know how often you need to see that patient. And with that, I thank you very much for listening to me, and I wish you a wonderful and successful conference. And if anybody has any questions or would like to contact me, my email is sblock@ico.edu, and I'd be more than happy to help share any information I can. My hope is that everybody will switch to myopia control and think about myopia as a disease and not simply a refractive error. Have a good evening. Goodbye.